a well-known photographer from the capital who has worked with most of the stars of the Ukrainian show business, turned out to be a real sexual predator. The man hunted very young girls, whom he corrupted, persuaded to have intimate relations, and created, let's say, adult content with their participation. Dear ones, this time I won't even tell you to sit more comfortably. This is really scary. So, on November 26, 2020, the Kyiv Region Police went to the left bank of the Dnipro River to the Art Bratislava Cultural Center. There was a studio there, the photo studio of the famous photographer Alexander Ktytorchuk. Within seconds, law enforcement officers burst into the building, detained the man, and began conducting searches. Thank you.
Hands over your mouth! Hands! Hands over your mouth!
Alexander was informed that he is suspected of corrupting minors. The basis for these accusations were several statements that had been submitted to the police the day before from the photographer's victims and from their parents. In particular, the mother of one of the girls said that Ktytorchuk saw her daughter on the street and immediately noted her photogenic appearance. After that, Alexander, showing initiative, introduced himself and had a short conversation with the girl. Then he gave her his business card and offered her a photo shoot. Soon, the man really did take some professional photos for the 15-year-old girl. After that, he continued to communicate with her. After some time, the girl's mother noticed that her daughter started avoiding Ktytorchuk and was even afraid to be alone with him. This is, of course, a very alarming sign, very much so. Later, the woman found out that at the end of October 2020, when her daughter was in the car with the photographer, he simply took out his private part. After that, he started pleasuring himself in front of the girl. After some time, the 56-year-old man started harassing, stalking, and touching the girl, and eventually pressured her to finish the act, so to speak, that Ktytorchuk had started. I'm sorry you have to hear this. Nevertheless, it's important to know about such so-called heroes in big, hairy quotation marks. And it's important to know what they're capable of so that nothing like this ever happens to you or your children. So, already in November of that same year, Alexander simultaneously coerced this same girl and her peer, Doroha, with an act and intelligence without any warning. In general, at the time of the so-called photographer's arrest, it was known that law enforcement was cooperating with 6 victims of Ktytorchuk's actions. During the arrest, the man himself, of course, denied all the accusations made against him. Alexander was placed under house arrest as a preventive measure. At that time, he was only charged under the article concerning the corruption of minors. However, later on, the evidence found during the investigation and the testimonies provided by the victims would give law enforcement grounds to reclassify this case. So, after Ktytorchuk was detained, searches were conducted not only in his photo studio, but also in his apartment and in the minivan that belonged to Alexander's partner. During the searches, it turned out that the man had modified that vehicle by installing something like a bed inside. Investigators suspected that the man did this in order to be able to carry out his actions more comfortably. Some of the victims confirmed that the abuse took place in this very vehicle. Others stated that the photographer committed the abuse against them in the photo studio where he worked. Also, during one of the searches in Ktytorchuk's apartment, evidence was found that indicated his guilt in another crime.
He recorded some of the acts on video and then stored them on his own computer. An examination is currently underway, and the initial review suggests that after the relevant studies are conducted, Article 301 may be applied to him, specifically that he will be suspected under the article on chronography, which is created with participation.
On November 28, 2020, a court hearing was held at which the preventive measure for the photographer was reviewed. By then, the man's charge had been reclassified. This happened partly because details of 2 more of the 6 cases involving the photographer became known. According to the testimony of one of the victims, in October 2019 in his partner's minivan, Alexander Andrest, the girl, who was still 3 years away from turning 18, despite her resistance and pleas to stop, was subjected to the act. In April 2020, another girl was subjected to abuse with rape. The participant in these events was a teenage girl 3 years younger than the previous victim. While the first 2 cases were considered by law enforcement as molestation, these 2 were already classified as rape. So now Ktytorchuk has been charged, not with just 1, but with 3 articles at once. Molestation, rape, and production of pornographic materials involving very young girls. I am choosing my words very carefully so that YouTube doesn't just block this video, dear viewers, otherwise I would speak differently. Especially about Ktytorchuk. The court session was held behind closed doors. However, before it started, Ktytorchuk managed to talk to the journalists. During the conversation, the man once again claimed his innocence. This
is a very simple explanation. On a basic human level, you understand that the people I'm accused of abusing, I later communicate with them. Then a year or half a year passes and they file a complaint. They probably force this complaint out of them. I don't know how these law enforcement officers communicate with them. I already have data and facts that they drag and force them to record. I'm intimidating. It's a show with many cameras. That's normal, right?
That day, Ktytorchuk asked the court again to release him under house arrest. But this time, the judge ordered the man to be arrested for 2 months without the right to post bail. After that, the police reported that if the suspect's guilt is proven, he could face up to 15 years in prison. This arrest, like the case itself, caused a lot of buzz in the media and in show business. In business circles, let's put it that way. The reason is that Ktytorchuk was one of the most famous photographers in our country at that time, with an impressive 30 years of work experience. In addition, the man collaborated with modeling agencies. He frequently served as a beauty contest jury member. He participated in popular television projects, including the mega-famous show Vidpatsanki du Panyaki. He mainly photographed show business stars, including Tina Karol, Kuzma Skryabin, Olya Polyakova, and many other famous personalities. So, let's just say he's not an ordinary photographer, and not an ordinary jerk. No, sorry, I meant an ordinary asshole. Besides, Ktytorchuk was known not only for his collaborations with famous people. For example, his manner of communicating with some models has repeatedly become a topic of discussion in numerous interviews that the man gave to various publications and YouTube channels. Alexander presented himself as a photographer psychologist and did not hide the fact that during shoots he often brought his models to tears. Usually it was to achieve the desired result. Ktytorchuk used psychological abuse and pressure.
In our country, to control a woman during a shoot, you need violence and sex. Let me explain what I mean. We all like real people with genuine reactions and true emotions. Most Ukrainians constantly anticipate an attack. And as a photographer, I have to use psychological pressure to shake, to snap, to allow people to be themselves without fear.
In some cases, when the photographer felt he was working with someone he considered abnormal, he allowed himself to yell at them or could even grab the model by the shoulders and shake them quite hard.
She lived like a fool for 20 years.
And she came in for 3 minutes to get a nice picture. I have no other choice.
I must make up for those 20 years of foolishness quickly and harshly with my own effort. I don't have another 20 years to bring her back to normal, or even 5 hours. Sometimes I have to do it quickly, but I do it harshly, pushing her instead of running.
That's how you shake her.
I can grab and shake her, that's all.
Besides that, Ktytorchuk often mentioned to journalists that he sleeps with some of his models, and openly talked about how, at the beginning of his career as a photographer, he mainly wanted to get just 2 things from this profession.
A camera is access to women. When I started, I wanted 2 things: to make money and to have sex. Even back then, I realized that for a man with a camera, it's easier to achieve these goals. By picking it up, a man gets a perfectly legitimate reason to start a conversation. For example, he might say, "I want to talk to you." To a girl, that might seem awkward or uninteresting. But saying, "Let me take your picture," is interesting to almost everyone.
After such confessions, it's not surprising that nude-style photo shoots are one of the genres Ktytorchuk often worked in. Ukrainian actress Olya also confirms this and notes that very young girls often participated as models in such photo shoots.
By the way, he photographed many of our stars nude, well, in a restrained way. But I somehow didn't dare look. Thank God, but I already noted back then that he was interested in the nude format. I saw that he photographed young girls, and even then I wondered how they agreed to it.
Ktytorchuk's nude-style works didn't surprise many people back then because overall it's quite a normal phenomenon. When you're an adult, doing this not under pressure but of your own free will is very important. Besides this, it's worth noting that Alexander specialized not only in nude photography. At the same time, his strange statements were long perceived as shock value, and sometimes even as sincerity. However, in 2020, after the accusations against the man and his arrest, all this scandalous behavior and the photographer's bold comments took on a completely different and sometimes even eerie tone. When the news about Ktytorchuk's detention began to spread in the press, Svitlana Karol received a link to it from her friend. According to Ms. Svitlana, she also became his victim at a young age. After reading the comments under the news from people who wrote that they couldn't believe Ktytorchuk could be involved in such terrible things, the woman realized she could no longer stay silent and decided to share her own story.
In this photo, I am 17, just moments before being pushed by the famous photographer Ktytorchuk. Yes, I became his victim, and it's time to share.
According to the girl, at that time she was a participant in the television project Chance Model Ukraine. There, among other things, the girls were taught how to pose for the camera. The training was conducted by Alexander Ktytorchuk. He took a photo of Svitlana, which the girl liked very much. While working with her, the photographer said how easy it was to photograph her and expressed a desire to take a few more pictures of her later in his studio. At that moment, the aspiring model couldn't believe her luck, but the girl still thought about her safety in advance and came to the shoot with her sister and her sister's friend. However, they were not allowed inside, and the girls had to stay outside and wait for Svitlana there. You see, Ktytorchuk's studio and his apartment turned out to be the same place. At the time Svitlana arrived, Alexander was having a photo shoot with another model there. So the girls started waiting for her turn, watching the process.
I remember watching how he came out. He told the girl to pose for photos without a bra. How quickly she agreed, or rather didn't resist. How with a light movement of his hand he took off her mesh and inspired her to feel free. I condemned this act and knew I would never agree to it myself.
After that shoot ended, the model left, and Svitlana was left alone with the photographer. The beginning of the photo shoot was completely normal. The girl was happy to have the opportunity to work with such a professional, and she dreamed about bringing the results of their work together to the best modeling agency in the city. But soon Alexander started asking Svitlana to bare her chest. At first, she refused. The man tried to convince her that one day she would be grateful to him. After all, thanks to the photograph, she would have a memory of what her body looked like when she was young. Oh damn, according to the girl, Ktytorchuk put a lot of pressure on her and manipulated her. And in the end, she agreed to take off her clothes. However, this process did not bring her any satisfaction.
On the contrary, it turned out to be very unpleasant. At the same time, the photographer started touching other parts of the girl's body.
He said he was doing all this solely to get a good shot. And how the hell is that even related? According to Svitlana, her mind simply blocked out many of the events from that day. She only remembers things in fragments. One of those fragments is how Ktytorchuk taught her about life. He said that to make men happy, it's better to trim the hair in your intimate area. After that, everything was like a nightmare.
When he suddenly, unexpectedly for me, he put his finger in, I was just in shock. I was screaming, I was talking to him, just begging him to let me go. I said that I didn't want this. I Even then, I was afraid not so much of the risk itself, but that he would risk me and then kill me. He kept touching my body, my waist, my breasts. I kept pushing his hands away. And he said, well, you already let me inside you, so why won't you let me touch your breasts?
Then, according to the woman, Ktytorchuk pulled her to the second floor of the studio, where there was a bed. The girl tried to resist, but she was much weaker. Svitlana began to beg, and several times, with tears in her voice, she said, please don't. That day, Ktytorchuk almost finished what he started. But unexpectedly for Svitlana herself, he left her alone. He lay on his back and said, I've never had this happen before, that I didn't finish. At that moment, the girl quickly jumped out of bed. As she was getting dressed, she felt that the danger had already passed, and she thought that after what she had experienced, she wouldn't leave without some photos. She almost ordered the photographer to give her the pictures. What did he do to her? Afterwards, Svitlana left the photo studio and withdrew into herself for a long time. She only told her sister and a few friends. By the way, later she came with one of those friends to Ktytorchuk to pick up the photo that was taken during the television project. Last time, she ran out of the studio and usually forgot about it in her hurry. Then Ktytorchuk took the girl aside and said that she had to understand. Everything between them was consensual. After all, Svitlana supposedly agreed to it herself. As the girl says, she didn't go to the police then because she didn't realize sexual violence includes more than penetration. It also covers everything she experienced. Besides, for a long time she felt that she was to blame for what happened. Only after the woman found out that Ktytorchuk had been detained for other very similar crimes did she finally dare to tell her own story. Because she didn't want other victims of the photographer to blame themselves and go through the same experiences, the pangs of conscience that Svitlana had lived with for a long time. After Ktytorchuk was placed in custody as a preventive measure in 2020, his lawyers filed an appeal. In response, Svitlana, the other victims and their relatives came to the courthouse, calling for Ktytorchuk's detention to be extended. However, there was someone who supported the renowned photographer. Ironically, it turned out to be the once famous producer Yuri Falyosa, who, as a reminder if you didn't know, was in a relationship with Ani Lorak for 12 years. According to her, when they started dating, she was only 15 and Falyosa was 30. It's no surprise that he was the one who defended Ktytorchuk, who was also his classmate, and with whom they had been friends for about 30 years. Obviously, the men have similar interests. A few years ago, Falyosa made his stance on seducing young girls absolutely clear. When journalists once asked him if he felt any guilt about seducing a 15-year-old girl, Falyosa replied as follows. For the full picture, the only thing missing here is a comment from Poplavsky, but he didn't give one. In February 2021, the man had his preventive measure extended in the form of detention. When the pretrial investigation in the case was completed, it turned out that the photographer was now charged with as many as 11 criminal episodes and the victims were 7 underage girls. Law enforcement officers also found out that Ktytorchuk began committing illegal acts as early as 2011.
The perpetrator forced teenagers to participate in explicit photo sessions by persuasion as well as by applying psychological pressure.
In May 2022, the case was sent to court. The trial lasted 2.5 years. Hearings were all held behind closed doors. During this time, Ktytorchuk was held in custody without the possibility of bail. It was only in January of this year that it became known that the Obolonsky District Court of Kiev found the now 60-year-old man guilty on all charges brought against him. Ktytorchuk was sentenced to 12 years and 10 months. The police also note that Alexander Ktytorchuk admitted his guilt and even compensated the victims for the moral damages caused. What is surprising in this case is that the photographer was banned from holding positions and engaging in activities related to working with minors and adults for only 3 years. The ban itself seems logical and justified. However, its duration seemed like it should have been lifelong, considering the severity of the crimes. But it is what it is, dear ones. Take care of yourselves, your family, and loved ones, and be careful about who you let into your life and who you keep there. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.